School is back, and Dick's Sporting Goods has what you need to win your year. We've got everything from cleats to Sambas, dunks, and more. Plus, the hottest looks from Nike, Jordan, and Adidas. Find your first day fits in-store or online at dicks.com.
The Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70, and usually in the other chair is Alan Medlock. But tonight we're doing a special show, and we're going to see how this works because it may be chaos. But we're doing the prospects show, which means we're bringing in everybody, all the names, all the guys you know, love. They're here. They're all here. Adam Akbani's here. Blake Newberry's here. Kyle Reis is here. Kareen is here. Guys, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I figured they would not speak, so they would pretend like I was just talking to myself. That would have been great. Cardinals are playing against the Royals tonight, but we're not going to really talk about the major league team on this one. We're going to really kind of focus in on what's going on, not only in the minors, but also what happened last month with the draft. And let's just start there. I gave you all a question. We're not going to answer that, or I'm not going to do that question. Yeah, let's just start with that question. Why don't we? Because all of them are panicked looking at me now. If you were to compare this draft to a character in your favorite fictional universe, Star Wars, Marvel, whatever the case may be, who would it be and why? I asked this question mainly because these guys have been everywhere, and I had to do something that was a little bit unique, and they're probably hating me significantly for it. Being that he is the elder statesman of this group, we're going to go to Kyle Reis to start this. Kyle, what do you think? Yeah, Kyle muted his, so he's maybe save us that way.
I said none of them. I hate you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that I should have gotten that anyway.
I don't have a good answer for your dumb question. No, how about this? It'd be a very promising, somewhat safe lead character. So none of them.
All right, Blake, you got something else?
Yeah, I can give you an actual answer here. Kyle's answer was not legitimate in any way. But so I know this is actually something me, Kyle, and Kareem talked about last Monday. Is just whether it was purposeful or not, the Cardinals ended up taking a bunch of guys who were really short. Mm-hmm. And when I think of that, I think the way I would characterize them would be like the Hobbits in Lord of the Rings, where they're all super short, but they actually have, like, they pack a little bit more into their smaller frames than you might expect initially. There's a lot of guys with some really good tools, a lot of guys who can actually hit the ball hard despite being like 5'9". A lot of guys, with pitchers on the pitching side of things with pretty good stuff despite being on the smaller side. So I think I'll take the Hobbits from the Lord of the Rings route on this question.
There you go. That's the way you take this question right there. Kareem, what do you got?
Daniel, I mean, this was a tough question. I've been thinking about it, for the past few days, ever since you sent that message. And I couldn't really think of something that was, that characterized each and every pick. But I ended up going with Grogu from Star Wars. And just because, I mean, I see Grogu as potentially, the face of Star Wars in the future. just like a lot of these prospects, especially, JJ Wetherholt. And, that's one of the reasons. And another reason to go along with what Blake was saying, they drafted a ton of shorter players. And, obviously Grogu kind of fits that description. And despite being, short, I think Grogu kind of makes up for it and uses that as an advantage, like some of the, shorter Cardinals draft picks. Like, for example, Brian Holiday, their third round pick, he's got a flat vertical approach angle, due to being a little shorter. So, yeah, that's my answer.
I like it. I like it. Adam, I know that we were talking earlier, and this was kind of, one of those things you weren't real sure about. So, do you have something? Do you want to go with it, or are you going to just defer to the others?
I'll try to give you a little bit of a better answer than what maybe Kyle gave, which was nothing. But I appreciate the effort, and I'll try to say, you know what? I saw Deadpool and Wolverine last week or a couple of weeks ago,
Mhm.
and Deadpool seems like a pretty confident, overzealous guy to a degree. So I'm gonna say that I'm a little confident, overzealous about the draft overall, and the fact that the Cardinals selected JJ Wetherholt 7, that the fact that he fell down to them. So that's a mediocre, somewhat answer, C, D, answer, but that's what we're gonna roll with.
I'll take it. I'll take it. It sounds
No
good.
big
I do like I said, when I thought of this question, I honestly had the height thing in mind as well. So I was thinking Ewoks, which kind of goes along with what y'all were saying. So I don't feel like I'm completely out of the loop on all this. Let's bring it back to our universe though. If you take out JJ Wetherholt, because we all know that was an awesome pick, that was great. You take that out. If you were able to grade this draft without that pick, what does it look like for you, Kareem?
I'll go with a solid B. I think some of the early second round picks were a little questionable. I've come around on them, like Ryan Holiday, for example, the pitcher. I think just diving into him a little deeper, I just see a guy that's really athletic, and I think the Cardinals are going to get more out of. Ryan Campos is a guy that doesn't have a ton of power, but I think he's going to be able to overperform some of his ground ball numbers just due to how he sprays the ball and the exit velocity he's able to put on the ball despite hitting a lot of ground balls and low line drives. So the early day 2 picks have come around on me. I'm still not crazy about it, but day 3 I think they absolutely killed it. A couple guys just to highlight: Daniel Ortiz, 16th round pick, I believe, from Walter State Community College. This is a guy that has a track record of hitting with wood bats against older competition, which is something I really value. And another guy, Sam Broderson, relief pitcher in the 15th round, has some nasty stuff, has a really good fastball. So I think overall it was a solid draft. And yeah, day 3, if I could get day 3 a grade, I give it an A. I think day 2 was more of a C plus. So if you average that out, I think around a B.
Okay. Anybody else have a answer that's farther apart from that? Because if we're all going to say the same, we don't need to go everything. Is that in line with everybody else, or does anybody want to give it a better grade?
I'm with Kareem on this one. I'm a solid B.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to go in any other direction without a second round pick. They did as good as they possibly could, especially with the back-to-back arm injury recovery picks in 7 and 8, round 7 and 8, as you could probably do with the money they had and the picks they had available. So yeah, some degree of a B for sure.
I know we've seen the early results on JJ Wetherholt. Adam, is this meeting expectations? Is this surpassing them? What do you think off the early returns?
Yeah, no, he's been absolutely fantastic so far, Daniel. And so if we look at some of his batted ball data, I think the hard hit rate I saw at least like a few days ago, and Kareem actually corrected me that I missed on some of the data on the what's it called, the
hit by pitches.
Yeah, the hit by pitches in the the database that we had, it was like a 75% hard hit rate at the time and some ridiculous sweet spot rate, which means that his batted ball contact ability has been fantastic so far. We kind of knew that he was going to be, hopefully he was going to be good out of the gates, being that, he was a Big 12 bat, and some of those Power 5 conferences tend to have, some pretty, the level of talent is akin to somewhat single A ball there. And especially him being the Big 12 of West Virginia, he was a Golden Spikes Award finalist, at least his sophomore year, seeing how good he was. It's not super shocking to see him off to the races the way that he is over at single A. And especially with the you see also with his play discipline, where he's walking an absurd amount and he's not striking out as much as you'd like, or as much as he's not striking out as much as you would hope he's not. So seeing that has been fantastic, and he seems like he's outclassing the level to a degree, at least right now. And I'm hoping that you can get a call up to Peoria maybe somewhat down the line, maybe a month or so, or a couple of weeks, because the season's about to end with the MILB. So if he gets a cup of coffee over at Peoria to end the season, I know some people were like, oh, what if he goes to Springfield? I don't think that's going to happen. There's no really any rush, especially the Cardinals, who's just picked this earlier this year. But it'd be interesting to see how the minor leagues the front office handles him, and they decide to push him early on, to have that Peoria stint, and then he'll start there next year to begin the year. So he's been fantastic so far, and can't wait to see what the future brings for him.
Yeah, and you kind of anticipated in my next question. I'll just pass it on over to Blake. But what does the progression look like for him on a reasonable basis? Because I know there's that group of the fan base that expects him to be like vying for major league job like next spring. Obviously, that's crazy. But what is a reasonable projection of like his timeline, do you think, Blake?
Yeah, I think there's degrees of reasonableness here, where I think, like, to Adam's point, he's obviously starting in Palm Beach. I would expect to see him in Peoria before the season's over. Next year, I would expect to see him get substantial time in Springfield, probably some time in Memphis as well. I think there is a chance, maybe not like a particularly high chance, but there is a legitimate chance that he is making his major league debut next year, depending on how he plays. That's obviously not going to be on opening day, unless the Cardinals decide that they want to just like rush him up from Peoria onto the major league roster for no good reason whatsoever, which I don't think that's going to happen. But I think there is a chance at which he is debuting in 2025. I think he will be in the conversation to be the starting everyday second baseman by 2026. Obviously, this all is projecting health forward with the hamstring issues and projected performance forward. But I think he's the kind of player that is really polished, doesn't have really any major holes in his game. He's the kind of guy you would expect to be able to handle everything that's thrown at him. So I would expect him to move a little bit quicker than some of the other first-round picks in this class.
Let's take a step back just a little bit and look at this. This is you've got another draft under the belt of Randy Flores. And again, you can't grade this draft yet because you have to see the results and everything of that nature. When we think of Flores, we think a lot about the first round picks, right? The Walkers, the Gormans, now Wetherholt. And a lot of these guys are people that have fallen to him. Does that make an impact, Kyle, on his reputation? Should it make an impact on his reputation? Is he overrated, underrated? What do you think about Mr. Flores?
I think he's rated about exactly as as a scouting director should be. Personally, I think right now, because of some of the struggles with the first round draft picks, the entire scouting department, even led by him, is getting panned a little bit. Especially Zach Thompson not materializing, Nolan Gorman having a lot of struggles, Jordan Walker, what's going on with him? Although he hit a monster shot tonight. I think that in the moment, it's easier to give credit. And as guys begin to start their major league journey, it's easier to knock the people who facilitate the players at the major league level. So I would say that he is rated about as, even with the criticisms, even with maybe the people who, will bow down to Randy Flores, I say the aggregate is about average. He and the amateur scouts deserve a ton of credit for the supplemental talent that they've given the St. Louis Cardinals. But there are still some concerns. There are still some criticisms that are warranted, specifically on the pitching side, and how the day one, day two pitchers haven't ever really materialized under Randy Flores. The best it's been is Dakota Hudson, really. There's a couple other people in there, Andre Palante, fourth or fifth round pick, whatever Palante was. But yeah, so I think even though the bats aren't producing maybe necessarily as loudly at the major league level as we hope for, really they've done about as well as you possibly could with where they pick most of the time with what they have to offer. So I think that he gets the exact credit that he's due, and the criticism is coming as the success isn't exactly there all the time.
Kareen, you were talking about how he, day 3 was a really strong day, which would seem to be an indication of, good scouting and everything of that nature. Does what Kyle's saying make sense to you? Would you modify that in any way?
Yeah, 100% agree with what Kyle's saying. I think particularly when you look at what the scouting staff has done in terms of offensive players, I think it's been phenomenal. I think the Cardinals have gotten very good value recently, even in those middle rounds, for offensive players. I think pitching wise, I don't know how much to put into the scouting staff, just because I feel like the organization sort of has a philosophy that they might pressure the scouting staff to draft some of these more pitchability kind of pitchers. So I don't know how much of blame I don't know how much we should blame the scouting staff for that. But yeah, overall, I think Flores has done a solid job. I think there are people that praise him as if he's the greatest scouting director, and I personally I don't see that, but he's done a solid job though. He deserves to be in the position he is right now. He hasn't shown anything for me to think otherwise.
Man, I had a question and it just went completely out of my head, and it was for
It's 'cause
Blake.
you're old.
Yeah, I think it is pretty much. But it's a good thing I'm not recording this, so nobody will hear me confess that. Well, let me just, I don't think this is a question I was, I'm doing it now. I remember it. See if I talk long enough, I'll get back to it. One track mind and all that. Blake, when we were all at the Blogger and Podcaster Day, and we heard Mo talk about, what Heimblum was doing, that he was producing kind of it felt like what it kind of implied, like this overview of the whole organization. How do you think that the minor leagues are going to fall into that, and what might some recommendations be from Heim when he finishes up this project?
Yeah, I do. I think we've already seen some changes throughout the organization, whether that is due to Heim Bloom, a change in thinking at the top. We don't really know. We can obviously attribute it to Heim Bloom since he's the new guy, and then you see some changes. It's pretty easy to make that logical leap. So that's kind of the side that I take things on. But I think we really, even just looking at kind of the Cardinals' philosophy on pitching, they've shifted a little bit more towards swing and miss. They've shifted away from fastballs a little bit more. Not extreme, not like the Red Sox, who just basically don't throw fastballs. But the Cardinals used to be, at least in the minors, like one of the teams that throw the most fastballs throughout the system. And that's ticked down like 5 percentage points from last year. So the corresponding increase has come really with sliders. We've seen them get a little bit more comfortable with sweepers, pitches that are just more known for missing bats. And I think that's a really big change for the Cardinals. And there have been times where I've questioned the Cardinals, maybe not understanding, but for lack of a better term, understanding of like modern pitching and pitch shapes and pitch metrics and things like that. And I think one of the things we saw in the draft is, even though the Cardinals, didn't take some of the highest ceiling pitchers that maybe we were hoping they would take in rounds like 3 through 5 or 3 through 6, they did take, to Kareem's point earlier, a number of pitchers with really flat approach angles going into the zone. They took a number of pitchers with pretty solid riding life on their fastballs. Like this is things that we didn't always see with the Cardinals. So I think that is at least progress. We'll see obviously what happens. I think next year, if I'm not mistaken, is Mo's last year. I think he said he's stepping down. So I think we'll see if Heim Bloom does end up stepping into that role, if the Cardinals end up really ramping up some of the efforts that they've already made this year.
Yeah, Mo's contract does end at the end of next year, although there's always the speculation that he may step away before that. And I think that's going to be. I think we always tend to look at the major league level and what things might be changing, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see what the minor leagues have as well. Let's shift back a little bit to the draft before we go on into the actual minor leagues. I know that y'all have probably answered this on every other show. I've seen Kareem get animated on a few things, so I do want to know though, and we'll start with Adam. Your favorite non JJ Wetherholt pick out of this draft?
Yeah, so I'm actually kind of glad that you mentioned this because there was one guy that I kind of tweeted about earlier and give me like I'm trying to buy myself a little bit of time so I can look him up here, his exact batted ball stats. But Ian Petrus out of University of Alabama, I think it was like a 12th round pick, and this guy has some absurd like 200, some maybe like I think it might have fallen to like a high 100s WRC plus early on, at least in Palm Beach. So we have some data to look at him. And he's not hitting the ball super hard. I think it was like a 20-30% hard hit rate, which is fine if he's going to be a contact first guy. And that sweet spot range and, the overall zone contact rates are pretty high. I know the sweet spot was in like the high 40s, at least early on. And he's not striking out like at all. I think it's like, let me see exactly what it was in terms of that strikeout to walk ratio. Yeah, 17.5% walk rate to 5% strikeout rate. So he's also off to the races early on. He's actually been the best performing draft pick, at least of the players that I can see out of the 3-year guys that were selected, right? He's been playing, at least from a statistical perspective, better than JJ Wetherholt. Obviously, Wetherholt has him in the hard hit rate, and that's exactly what you kind of want to see and what you would expect from a first round pick and a top 10 guy. But given that this guy was selected in the 12th round, he's coming from an SEC school and he had a lot of success there. That's an extreme value pick in round 12. So to see him, have this kind of success early on is very inviting and it's very intriguing. So, we talked about Wetherholt might be getting pushed to Peoria early on this year, at some point later this year. I wouldn't be surprised if Petrus also gets pushed as well. Just be given, his age and how well he's been playing. And he's going to turn 22 a little bit younger or earlier than Wetherholt, I believe. So I would love to see him challenged at a higher level, but I could also see him staying down at Palm Beach just to see if he can really tap into that power. But, for me, at least my answer is Ian Petrus just starting out. And I might have taken the answer from someone else, but hopefully you guys can dig in and find your own someone else.
We'll toss it over to Mr. Kyle then. Kyle, what's your pick?
Well, I think, as I mentioned just a little while ago, I think that the two most interesting picks are Andrew Dukanich and Jack Finley, the 7th and 8th round picks back to back. But I'm not going to get into either of those guys. I think the guy that I've been most interested in watching Palm Beach this week has been Nolan Sparks, the 13th round pick. And we talked about him.
We're not going to look it up.
Yeah, he's right. 13th.
Once you get to like 12, 13, 14, I always get those mixed up. But just watching him this week in relief at Palm Beach, he's nasty. And he's nasty up in the zone. And his motion is kind of nasty. And he's got something really tight that he likes to spin up in the zone. And I'm not sure if it's a cutter or a slider, whichever one. I think it's a slider. But it's nasty. And he's a really interesting arm. And he would probably be, if I was going to say, probably the pick that I'm most interested in now based solely on performance of what I've seen that isn't JJ Wetherholt.
Blake, I'm watching you because I think I know everybody else's pick. It's very interesting. But what is your personal pick?
So I'll go with one of the guys Kyle mentioned but didn't actually get into, and that's Andrew Dukanich. I think Dukanich was a guy who only threw like 20 innings in college because he just happened to get hurt every year, and I think only one of those years was actually an arm injury. So, I mean, there's that. There's definitely some injury risk with the profile, but in terms of all the pitchers that the Cardinals took, he probably has the best stuff. His fastball is like 94, 95, good riding life, 2 good breaking balls. Like, this is a guy who's probably, if he can stay healthy, the best pitcher the Cardinals took in this draft. And that includes like the Brian Holiday pick that went in the 3rd round, because Holiday does have that good command and that good pitchability and the athleticism on the mound and all of those things that the Cardinals typically value. But in terms of pure stuff, Andrew Dukanich might be the best arm the Cardinals took, and they were able to grab him in the 7th round. So if he can stay healthy, that's a huge value.
Green?
Yeah, I'll go with the 11th round pick, John Gazdar. Now, Gazdar is a guy that's got impressive bat-to-ball skills. I mean, the Cardinals drafted a ton of players this year that have, very good contact rates. And Gazdar actually is the highest among all of the players the Cardinals drafted, which is crazy, considering, they took Wetherholt. And not only is he making contact, he hits the sweet spot a ton. So tons of line drives. He's going to hit for a high average. This season, he only struck out 14 times in 279 plate appearances for Austin Peay. So not a ton of swing and miss, just going to make a ton of contact. The exit velocities are mediocre at best, but I just think this is a guy that's just going to make a ton of contact, and I'm very interested to see how he progresses. He also has pretty good success in Cape Cod, so I'm not in the Cape Cod League, so I'm not too worried about his ability to hit with wood bats. And yeah, I think Gazdar could be a sneaky great pick in the 11th round.
All right, let's look at the minor leagues as a whole a little bit. Blake, if you were kind of giving a state of the minors address, if you will, what stands out to you as a positive overall, and what still needs work?
So I think the Cardinals system is almost in like the exact opposite place where it was last year. Whereas last year I felt like they had a lot of really interesting hitters and not a ton of super interesting pitchers. I feel like that's totally flipped this year, and they have a lot of really interesting pitchers. And a lot of their top hitting prospects either didn't get off to great starts, just aren't as promising as we maybe thought they were at the start of the year, and they just aren't looking as good overall. Although we've seen improvements from guys like Sajasi and Victor Scott, and like that's been really impressive overall. But I think when I look at some of the pitchers that are in the system, and specifically some of the pitchers that are in the lower levels of the system, looking at Palm Beach specifically, there's a number of really interesting arms who can miss bats, who have good control, who have good fastballs, which is oftentimes what can give a pitcher like a lot of that upside to really grow past that like back end of the rotation projection that gets thrown on a lot of guys. So I think, at least in terms of the pitching, the Cardinals are in a good spot. And I think they drafted a number of really interesting bats that are really going to help bolster the system if they can kind of show some of that potential that they showed in college.
Adam, if you were giving a grade to overall minor leagues, what would it be for you? I mean, what does it stand at? Does something stand for you?
I would probably rank it around a C or a C minus. I know that they're probably slightly below league average in terms of overall farm system depth. So I mean, I guess like an average grade would be like a C or C minus in that regard. So kind of like what Blake mentioned, they're not really hitting on a ton of the like the bats that they have selected. I know like Chase Davis, some of the, like some people will say like he's still like I probably an impactful everyday player. I think that's kind of trending towards maybe a fringe everyday player, maybe not even like a full-time starter, right? Where he's not hitting the ball nearly as hard enough for a guy that you thought would, who was drafted as like, a bat first corner outfielder with power. Just him, like that's one guy who was selected last year, but even then you look at some of the Cardinals prospects and there's just not a lot of top hitters near, the top end of their prospect list. You see JJ Wetherholt right there. And it's Victor Scott, who, isn't a hitter. He's a defensive first outfielder, is probably, an overglorified Ben Revere with a little bit of power. And, the rest of these guys, you've got, Tink Hens, you've got Quinn Matthews, Takeo Roby, Cooper Jerpy, who are your top prospects, and they're all pitchers. And like how Blake mentioned, it's kind of taken a 180 from last year. And, it's not that I'm not, going to sit here and say that's a bad thing to it so much. I mean, you would hope that, this kind of balanced out and they have two of the top at the very they have, the best of both worlds. But, seeing a guy like it is kind of scary seeing a lot. And they're having some, misfortune with guys like Tinkens, Roby, and Jerpy have been injured for, large parts of the season, for some of these guys. But, overall, it's still a work in progress. I would have liked them to see, probably take a different strategy with the team, at least in the major league level, in terms of recycling some of the talent they had to replenish the minor league system that they've been having difficulty with. But it is what it is, and I hope that the coaching staff will do their due diligence in pushing some of these prospects to do to be the best of their own abilities. So right now it is somewhat frustrating. It is sad to see that some of these guys haven't taken the step up that you would like, but we'll see what happens going forward.
Kyle, we were talking about the pitchers and a lot of intriguing names, but all of them seem to have these two letters at the end of them, IL, We've seen a lot of these guys. I think everybody with a name except for Quinn Matthews, and I hated to even say that because I feel like I should knock on wood.
How dare you?
Yeah, I know. Is that just the nature of pitching? Is there something? I mean, because it does feel like it's been almost overwhelming this year. Is that just the nature of the beast?
I personally, I'm going to say it's the nature of the beast. I'm not one of these people. I'm sure that there are some organizations that understand the kinetic chain, who understand mechanics and the amount of work that needs to go into mechanics to help sustain long-term health. I just think it's the nature of pitching. You know, I maybe they could have done a couple things here and there, but yeah, absolutely. I don't think this is like, oh, this is on the Cardinals organization. You know, maybe there is some health and nutrition type things that they can do to maybe put off a IL stint for a month or 2 months or 6 months, but this is going to happen. It's just going to happen at the same time. You know, really the way that I view the organization this year in the minors, it was just slow developing. It was Tink Hence and Quinn Matthews got off to hot starts, and everybody else just kind of like figured it out on the fly. You know, Jimmy Crooks was one of the few hitters that was, you know, who has been good from start to finish this year. And he even was hurt for a little bit of time this, you know, in the year. It hasn't really been until the last 2 months where we've seen a lot of the guys have success. The last month, 2 months, that we've seen a lot of the guys have success the way that we thought they would. You know, even as high end as Jordan Walker or as highly touted or highly hyped as Chase Davis. But we're starting to see it now. And the timing is weird, especially because of promotions throughout the minor leagues. But yeah, to your initial question, I think it's the pitching issues, injuries, IL next to their names. I think it's just coincidence. And I think it also tells you that the Cardinals were willing to take some chances on some guys who had a little health issue in the past, right? Trading for Tekoa Roby, that was a guy with some health issues in the past, but you go for the high end talent, the high end arm. We knew that Jerpy's arm angle left a lot. There were some questions from that. So I think in regards to that, things just happen, and the Cardinals took some chances, and it isn't exactly paying off right now. It doesn't mean it won't. And it's been nice over the last month or so to see some of these guys that we thought would end up take off, you know, not just Crooks, but like Leonardo Bernal. Bernal had an awful first month of the season and has been every bit as good as we hoped he would be, and steady throughout the rest of the season. So it's been a really interesting year on the farm from my perspective.
Kareen, when we're talking about pitchers, and I'm gonna, it's kind of goes with what Kyle's saying, but I think about, you know, the Cardinals were really careful with Tink Hence. They've been kind of cautious here and there, and I think part of these IL stints is also them being somewhat cautious, right, to make sure that they don't have any other issues. Do you have a problem with how the Cardinals are developing the pitchers, at least in the health side of things?
It's hard to say specifically in the lower levels. Like, when you take a look at a guy like Zach Showalter, for example, the Cardinals have. This was a guy coming out of high school that had a ton of promise. I think he was like a 10th round pick, but he signed for Overslot. And he was obviously in the trade that sent Jack Flaherty to the Orioles last year. But yeah, like a guy like Showalter, he's dealt with a lot of injuries, and the Cardinals have used him out of the bullpen this year. And recently, he just got put back in the IL. So I think there are the Cardinals are, you know, being cautious for a good reason, I think. But like in terms of when you look at what they've done with Cooper Jerpy, I wasn't overly, you know, a fan of what they did there. It seemed like he was going 60, 70 pitches every game, and it wasn't like he was like improving his pitch count or anything. They just kept him at like a 70 pitch plateau, which was weird to me. So it's kind of tough to say. I do think in particular, like with the Tink Hence example, I think they've handled Hence very well. Being a guy that came out of high school, someone of a smaller stature, I think they handled Tink Hence well, and they continue to do it. I think with him coming back from injury, they've started to build him back up every start, and I think that's great. But yeah, like I'm not 100% on board with everything they've done, but I think for the most part it makes sense, and they're being cautious, which is good.
Being cautious in the right circumstances, just like Kareem said, they've handled Markevian Hentz as perfectly as you could have possibly done it, like with the early arm injuries and everything. But since Kareem brought up Jerpy, I would like to just chime in for just 1 second.
I figured you might.
And I was really trying not to. I want that to be said. I would like for that to be stated when I was tiptoeing around the health thing. Hopefully the Cardinals have learned their lesson that not only their prospects, but their major league talent, you can't be so careful that you're actually hurting them in the long run. Like, you would think that they would have learned it from Steven Matz as I watched the Cardinals, struggle here against the Royals. You think that they would have learned it against Steven Matz with him, like babying him in spring training. Like, no, he was going to go on the IL the minute you started extending him. That's how it works when you baby guys. And they did the same thing with Jerpy. When you go into June, and he started from day one, and sure, he had an awful start, his first start for Peoria. But when you go into June and you haven't pushed him beyond 65 pitches, then when you get him to 80, a couple of 80 in, he's going to have arm fatigue. That's just going to happen. And you did that to yourselves. Be smart, be forward thinking. If you want to do 65 for a month and a half, that's whatever, and then slowly ramp it up. But you got to be smarter than that. It was just bad practice, and here we are.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's so weird because I think back, way back to when Steven Strasburg was coming up, right? And they were trying to do everything they could as they moved up the organization in Washington to make sure that when he made it to the major leagues, he would be fine. And we know how that all turned out. I mean, there's got to be, but it doesn't work for every pitcher, right? I mean, some pitchers are good, some pitchers are just going to get hurt. And finding that balance is a difficult thing. Speaking of pitchers that were unexpected, Adam, Michael McGreevy made a debut that I don't think I didn't see coming. Y'all are experts at this, and Kyle and I have talked about Michael McGreevy a few times. Were you surprised at how well he did in his start, and do you think that earns him a lot more rope with the organization?
Yeah, I actually, I was not expecting Michael McGreevy to go up 7 innings strong and allow 1 run. And he didn't really strike out anyone, which we know he's not going to be that guy. But I guess it really was just one outing. And, it was nice to see. And he's had a little bit of a better season this year at AAA. But in general, I don't really think he's, he's going to be so much of an impact arm at the major league level the same way we would have seen him picked, out of, as a first round pick, just simply because he's not really a swing and miss guy. I know Kareem mentioned that he got a little bit more extension off the mound, especially in that one major league start, which would help with that velocity perception a little bit. But, just in general, let me see we got a little bit of data here from Savant. He's going to rely obviously on that sinker and the slider and the four-seamer, but there isn't really a swing and miss pitch, especially with his sinker only really generating about 14 inches of arm side movement. And there's not a ton of vertical movement with that fastball either with 13 inches. And he only throws it 20% of the time for a reason. So he's going to rely on that sinker and the slider. He's not going to miss a ton of bats. And even this year at he had that one start when he came back from the major league stint at Memphis where he shoved and he was really good. But, like we said, it's just one start, and we'll see what happens, the rest of the way. Or he might have pitched, and I haven't just seen it, but he might have pitched again. But, he's not really the guy who you think is going to be like a mid or top rotation arm. Maybe he sneaks into the back end of the rotation, maybe a long reliever. But, it was interesting to see him pitch well, and they got what they needed out of him that game. And I would have, if he would have told me that he was going to do that, I would have said, no, there's no way. And, he did. So it was really nice to see there, but we'll see what kind of improvements he makes at AAA and what he's able to do building off of that confidence. But, for now, I would say that he needs to do a little bit more for me to say, okay, he's going to be more than maybe a 5th or 6th guy in a rotation, bleeding into the bullpen or something more than that.
Yeah. He's got that moment, if nothing else. And being that, what was it going around? He was the first person to make his major league debut in St. Louis since Mike Myers. It worked out a lot better than that.
Yeah.
So giving that.
It's like the worst ever.
Yeah, it was bad. Let's shift to the hitters a little bit. And Blake, we've talked a little bit. We've mentioned the name Jimmy Crooks, and I wanted to just get an overview a bit of the catcher situation because we're seeing Ivan Herrera at Memphis, which is an interesting choice. You have Crooks and Berdal and others coming up the ranks. What does the catcher position look like over the next, maybe this time next year?
I mean, I think the Cardinals have a number of incredibly interesting and incredibly talented catching prospects in this system right now. You look at the guy, I mean, Ivan Herrera has no business being in AAA at this point. The Cardinals have needed a right-handed bat for like the entire season. They get an above-average right-handed bat, and then they put him back in AAA. Makes no sense. He should be in the majors. I know there's some issues maybe with the defense and the arm and whatnot. Those things can be improved. I'm not necessarily sure we're going to see a ton of improvement with that during the season as much as we might in the offseason, but I would much rather have that bat in the majors. I think he's a major league caliber player already, and I would love to see him there. And then even when you go further down in the system, you have a guy like Jimmy Crooks, who's a solid defensive catcher. He just hits a million line drives. Like, the guy literally will just spray line drives all over the field. He'll line drive you to death. Occasionally he'll get under it and get some home runs. And he's just a super consistent hitter. Like Kyle said, he was like one of the few hitters that actually started the year well. He hit well in the middle. He's hitting well now. He's just been hitting the ball extremely well the entire season. And I think one of the benefits of moving Ivan Herrera to the majors would be potentially backfilling with Jimmy Crooks to let him actually get some AAA experience, because he's more than shown that he can hit AA pitching. And then I think we even keep going down. You've got like Leonardo Bernal, very talented catching prospect, super young, will have great numbers, especially for his age at the level he's playing at. You even go further down, you got Samir Hernandez in single A, who's been really good. Carlos Linares is a guy that I actually really just kind of enjoy. He doesn't really hit the ball very well, but he's an amazing defensive catcher. Like, the Cardinals have a number of really good options. They shouldn't have to go and actually make like another Wilson Contreras kind of move at the catcher position for a while. And I think they've put themselves in a position where they have so many interesting catchers. They can kind of decide if they want to go with like a Wilson Contreras, Ivan Herrera, Pedro Pages trio for a while, and maybe trade some of the other guys and trade from a position of strength and surplus in order to actually add other spots to the roster where you're potentially weaker. So I think there's a number of interesting things the Cardinals could do, but I would love to really, to circle it all back, see Ivan Herrera back on the Major League roster at some point here very soon.
It is and I know we weren't going to talk about the major leagues too much, but the usage of Contreras and Pages has been very interesting to me. To see Pages behind the plate so often and Contreras DHing is an interesting choice that I wouldn't have expected.
Especially because Pages is not doing much to control the running game, and also it's not like he's getting better results out of the pitchers, right? It's just not happening. So that makes it even more interesting.
Yeah. So, Kareem, since we have now solved the catching situation, tell me about Jordan Walker. Tell me when we're going to see Jordan Walker. Tell me if Jordan Walker's fixed. If he's not fixed, when will he be fixed? Just basically give us all the answers on Jordan Walker.
Yeah, so I mean, Jordan Walker's killing it right now. He's hitting the ball as good as he has in quite some time. Definitely this year, that's for sure. He hit a home run today, which is great to see. I've heard that he has made some changes to his swing. I haven't really noticed them. Just analyzing the video, nothing too drastic, but he just looks more comfortable in the box right now. It seems like he's swinging more at pitches he can handle. Like earlier in the season, you would see him swing a lot at breaking balls outside of the strike zone. I think he's cleaned that up a little bit. Walker's still like a very aggressive hitter, so there will be some of that. But I think just approach wise, I think he's doing a better job at swinging at pitches that he does damage on, which is great, and he's having a lot of success right now. So I'm not sure if he's going to come back and be an everyday regular player for this team this year. I'd honestly like to see him just continue to produce at AAA this year and the year off at AAA, unless there's any injuries to the big league club and they really want to just throw him in the lineup every day. But I don't really see that happening, to be honest. I think Walker's going to play the majority. He's going to finish the season out at AAA. I think. I don't know about what these other. I don't know what you guys think, but I personally think he's going to finish off at AAA unless there are any injuries to the big league club, and hopefully he can continue the success that he's had over the past few weeks and into the end of the AAA season. And come 2025, hopefully he can kill it and have a great year as the Cardinals starting right fielder.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I have. Oh, go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention that he's still having a lot of problems topping off a lot of pitches and rolling over them and grounding outs. To a degree, he's doing a better job of hitting the ball pull side, right? Really cooking some of that power, making something out of it. And it's been kind of interesting to see him just all year, where you kind of see him starting to have some success, and then he starts to struggle again, right? It's been very much a roller coaster season for Jordan Walker at AAA, and even then, still like 17 points below league average in terms of his production. But I mean, hopefully that goes up at the end of the day with a home run and a triple so far. But yeah, I think especially with the Cardinals, kind of more towards the contending side of the spectrum. Maybe if they fall out of it, maybe that would. I mean, even then, that would probably mean that he still stays in AAA. But if he continues to stay hot, then the contrary to what I said, he would probably maybe he gets a look at the major league roster, especially with the kind of expanding another spot. It might go to a pitcher, and it probably will be. But I could definitely see him getting some reps at the major league level if he continues to stay hot for the next couple of weeks, going into early September when the minor league season ends. And if he's still producing there, if they need another right-handed bat, there's very few guys, even at the major league level, with the kind of raw power that Jordan Walker has. So I wouldn't mind banking on seeing him succeed. And if it was my call, I would have promoted Jordan over Victor Scott, because you can just slide Nootbaar to center, have Walker play right field, and hopefully he's been playing better defense this year. I haven't seen Jordan in AAA with the glove, but I would assume that with another year of expertise down under his belt, he's been a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, that's another story for another day. But I would hope that, it is somewhat scary because he's heading into Jordan Adele territory for slightly different reasons. Adele had has absurd strikeout rates, and Jordan is better in that regard. But if you look at the big power hitting right fielder, who, he's just not having a lot of success this year, and it's kind of overdrawn over the course of almost 350 plate appearances at this point. And, some people will say, the age question, he's still 22. The red flag for me is that he had success last year. He was good, especially towards the last quarter of the season. He had like a 140 something WRC plus. And, that's no BS over the course of 150 PAs. It's somewhat small, but that is, a decent sample size. So it is worrisome. And I feel like it's definitely fundamental to a degree. And, fingers crossed, the Memphis coaching staff can figure it out, or maybe the major league coaching staff can figure it out. And maybe Ryan Ludwig can save the day with Jordan Walker as well. But, we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in here for a minute too on the Jordan Walker discussion, what we've seen is, I know there's been a lot of emphasis on Jordan Walker's ability or inability to actually elevate the ball and hit the ball in the air where he can really tap into his power. And that's been a subject the Cardinals have brought up, media's brought up, fans have brought it up. I think one of the things we've really seen from Jordan Walker, if you want to look at his fly ball rates, he really struggles to elevate pitches that are low in the zone. And that goes back to what Kareem said earlier, where he's been doing a much better job of laying off those breaking balls that are down and outside the zone. Those are pitches he doesn't do a lot with. And I was watching a Memphis game the other day, and that was one thing that they said they did an interview with him, basically. And that's one of the things he said was his primary focus right now was laying off sliders that are down in the way. And I think that's really one of the big steps for him, is if he can lay off of those pitches, he's going to get back to actually swinging at pitches where he can do damage. And I really think that's the thing with him. I don't think they need to make any sort of like drastic change to a swing, or really a lot that he does. He's already just a supremely talented hitter. I think they just let him go out and hit. That he'll be great. If he can just work on that pitch selection a little bit, I think we'll start to see some better results.
All right. Kyle, do you have anything on Jordan Walker?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would chime in is from the defensive standpoint, he has definitely taken huge steps forward defensively. And I think that's really important. As far as hitting goes, like he needs to relax. He's always just needed to relax. And we as fans have always kind of needed to relax a little bit about our criticisms of him, including hitting the ball on the ground, including pull side power. Like, the mistake was calling him up to the majors when they called him up to the majors, was not giving him time to breathe. And because he wasn't given time to breathe, we weren't given time to breathe, and we are constantly reacting to it. So I'm not just the 22-year-old of it all, but the young human being of it all. Like, just give him some time. I would suspect that when you get to September, you get one pitcher, one hitter. The hitter will probably be Ivan Herrera. The pitcher will probably be, hopefully, John King, who gets sent down to the minors as soon as possible. And, and then we figure it out from there.
Well, I have 3 questions for y'all as a roundtable ending question.
Daniel, I'm sorry, we're not taking questions tonight.
Yeah, well, being that you just answered that one, the first one, I don't guess I will ask you, and that will be fine. My first question was to tie back to what Adam was saying and then what Kyle has said. We are just short of, 3 weeks until rosters expand. And typically yes, one hitter, one pitcher. Blake, we've already heard from Mr. Kyle about his thoughts on it. Who do you think are those guys?
So I agree with Kyle on Ivan Herrera is probably going to be the hitter. I think what's interesting is I actually don't think we're really going to see a prospect come up on the pitching side because you have Steven Matz and Riley O'Brien, who are both going to be coming back from injury. They're going to need to create roster spots for those guys. Like, I think there's a world in which Kyle Leahy gets sent down when September starts, and then like Matz and Riley O'Brien are back, and then they're back even with where they need to be.
And both of those guys are on the 60, so you're going to have to create some 40-man room for those guys too, right?
Yeah, if those guys do actually come back, I have not even bothered to check. I know O'Brien, I think both of them are making rehab appearances, so they're well on their way back. So yeah, they'll have to create 40-man spots for them at some point. So they'll have to actually start looking at who they can DFA or to actually remove from the roster, or the 40-man roster.
Kareen, who do you think? Are you in line, or do you have other thoughts?
I'm in line with Kyle and Blake. I do expect Ivan to get called up. I think that they with the extra couple roster spots, I think just having a little bit more space in your roster for a second catcher on the bench, I think they promote Herrera. And on the pitching side of things, like, I think they go with Matz. I think we'll see Riley O'Brien. He's looked great at AAA when I've watched him. The stuff looks to be back to what it was at the start of the season, which is very encouraging. He's averaging like 97 miles per hour recently in his recent outings. So it should be fun to see him towards the end of the year. But yeah, some combination of those 3 guys, I think.
Adam, you got any different names to toss out there?
Probably not so much different on the hitting side. I would think it's probably Herrera. I mean, just for one thing, I will say we've seen the Cardinals carry 3 catchers, for a decent amount of time, whether it's been this year or last year. I know they had like Andrew Kisner, it was Herrera, and Wilson Contreras. It was that nightmare rotation they had going on with Kisner. But I think with the pitching side, I'm going to go slightly different. In a toss-up, I'll say Chris Roycroft. I mean, this is a guy who's got arguably one of the better sinkers in your organization. So if they were to, this is a guy who can miss bats on a vertical manner. So if they were to bring him back up, it would be pretty interesting to see him, pitch out of the back end of that bullpen.
Yeah. I still miss the days of the real expanded rosters.
Me too.
I think to get a chance to see some of these guys would be a lot more fun when you're just doing it. Like you said, it really is just, okay, let's bring a guy up that's already been up all this year. You don't really see anything exciting. All right. Next question. Favorite, I don't know how to phrase this. Favorite, not obscure prospect, but not, top of the list prospect. So somebody that's not in the maybe a general top 10. Or, Kyle goes, 100, 200, I think is what he talks about every year. But, something like that. Kareen, who you got?
I got to go with my boy, Luis Gastelum. I think he's got the best changeup in the Cardinals system right now, and arguably in all of minor league baseball. It's a pitch that's just got a ridiculous whiff rate. He throws it as a primary pitch, which is crazy. Comfortable using it against both righties and lefties. It's a pitch that just gets a crazy amount of depth for a changeup. Like, I'm pretty sure it has close to -3 inches of, close to -3 inches of induced vertical break, which is nuts for a changeup. And he's still getting a ton of arm side run on the pitch too. So yeah, I think Luis Gastelum's changeup might be the best pitch in the Cardinal system right now. I don't think he's getting any sort of talk in terms of like prospect lists. And personally, like I think he deserves to at least be considered. I have him around 25 on my list for the Cardinal system. So this is someone that is a relief pitcher. So like just keep that in mind. I'd like to see him get a chance to start at least, just because when you have a pitch as dominant as his changeup, I think it's at least worth a shot to see what that looks like out of the rotation. But yeah, Gastelum is definitely one of my favorite players in the system. I tweet about him all the time. Like I constantly just post videos of his changeup. He's just extremely fun to watch, and yeah, that's my pick.
It's so fun to see Kareen get so excited about these guys. Blake, what do you got?
So I love Gastelum too. That is a fantastic pick. I think one of the guys who I've been super interested by is a guy who I knew nothing about until like last week, and that's Michael Watson, who was actually the guy the Cardinals picked up as an undrafted free agent. He's a dude who comes with a super low arm slot. It's like a 5.3 release height, and he gets a tremendous amount of riding life on the pitch with a ton of extension. He's only sitting like 90 miles per hour, super low velocity. He's a guy who pitched an NAIA ball for 3 years and then pitched at like Sam Houston State in his last year, goes undrafted. He makes like 1 or 2 appearances in Palm Beach, and he's showing a fastball with fantastic specs. I think he's a guy who, if he can add just a couple ticks of velocity to all his pitches, the fastball, the slider, everything he throws, he's going to be super, super interesting and could be a really, really interesting pickup as a guy who really slipped through the cracks in the draft, but has some actually incredibly intriguing stuff for a guy who didn't get picked. So I'm very curious. I have not been able to actually watch him pitch yet. He's one of the guys that's on my list. It's hard to actually like pay attention to Palm Beach games and catch like one inning here and there when I can, but he's one of the guys I really want to watch, and one of the guys I'm really interested to follow, because I think he's undersized, but the Cardinals have a pretty good history of adding velocity to guys. If he can even go from 90 to 92, his fastball is going to look 93 with a tremendous movement profile. He's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that that goes back to scouting too, right? To be able to pick up these kind of guys, even that aren't drafted, and turn something into it. Very, very interesting. Adam, your guy.
So I'm probably going to get clowned for this pick, and it's totally okay because I overhyped him at the beginning of the year, and I think Blake, you probably know who I'm talking about, and it's Angelo Encarnacion, and he's been god awful at Palm Beach this year, and I'm so shocked. And he's actually been a little bit better in the past few days, but the reason why I was so high on him is because it was only like a 20 PA sample, and I was talking with him earlier this year, and the Cardinals pushed him to Peoria straight from the complex league where he hit last year, right? So, and the reason why he said that is because if there's something, maybe an underlying data metric, the Cardinals kind of like to push guys in that regard. And I think the reason why they did that, I saw Kareen mention that he had like a 109 point something max exit velo, and if he's doing that as a 6 foot shortstop, like a shortstop with that kind of power, that's super projectable, at least from a raw data perspective. And he's still 20 years old, right? There's still time for him to develop, and he's playing a little bit better. The swing and miss issue is a problem. But the reason why I was so high on him, at least at the beginning of the year, is because through 20 PAs, obviously very, very small sample, he had like 8 walks, right? Which you can't bullshit that. You can't really BS that out of the gate. And to have like a 40% walk rate, or even then, I think to a degree was like a 50%, might have been a little bit higher with less PAs, was absolutely ridiculous, especially for a guy who skipped a level of full season baseball and went straight to Peoria. So, they were a little bit overzealous with that, because after like 20 or 30 PAs, he started striking out a ton. And it's also shown at Palm Beach. It's been pretty bad also. Starting to turn around maybe a little bit, starting to adjust to the level, but, we'll see. He's still basically a college sophomore, maybe training to be a junior at the level. So we'll see what happens next year. Probably returns to Palm Beach unless something ridiculous happens this year. Maybe gets a promotion to Palm Beach to begin 2025. But just by sheer virtue of him being a power hitting middle infielder, it's pretty interesting to me, especially with the frame that he's got and the potential on defense.
All right, Kyle, we'll let you wrap it up. What's your guy?
I don't think he'll ever be anything more than just like a role player here and there. But one guy that I've really liked watching at the plate, even though he's struggled since making his Double A debut, is Dakota Harris. There's two fringy infielders that I really like. One is Dakota Harris. Another one is Miguel Villarroel. Villarroel is interesting. Again, struggling a little bit at Peoria. Both Harris and Villarroel are a little too free swinging to maybe have long-term success, but they each have an interesting amount of pop off their bat. They can both play pretty much all over the infield. I think Villarroel has all the makings to be a shortstop, maybe not a great shortstop, where I think Harris is more of a fringy second baseman, third base type. I think both of them would play the outfield if they had to, but Miguel Villarroel and Dakota Harris are probably the two names that, again, I don't think that they're going to be starters in any capacity. I don't think either of them, the chances of them even making a major league debut are probably slim. But especially Dakota Harris's ability to rise to the challenge and be in the middle of a lot of offense almost consistently. I just really like him, even though the ceiling is kind of interesting and probably not all that high. It is worth throwing out there to compliment the points that were made. Is the Cardinals have a really interesting group of pitchers that are young and at the lowest levels who I think we would all like to see become starters, and has some of these starters who have been drafted fade into oblivion or become relievers. And it's going to be interesting to watch some of that in the next couple of years.
Sorry, I still have, shell shocking when I hear Dakota, and I start thinking about Dakota Hudson, and it's just not good. So
it's tough.
It is. It's some muscle memory that you just got to shake. So anyway, final question, and it kind of goes along with this probably, but assuming that you have sit down one night, you can only watch one of the Cardinals minor league affiliates, assuming they actually have good camera angles, because I know that plays into this, right? If you could only, and not flip back and forth and gif like 18 different at bats, right?
Yeah.
If you're only watching one of them and you don't, just random, you don't know who's pitching or anything like that, which team are you picking? And I'll start with Kareen.
Yeah, I got to go with Palm Beach. This is a easy answer for me. I mean, especially with the draft picks coming in there recently. But going back to, what we've talked about throughout this podcast, like the pitching at the lower levels, specifically Palm Beach. I know some of those guys have gotten promoted, whether it be Quinn Matthews or Darlin Saladin. But there's still a ton of guys at that level that I like. A guy like Jose Davila, for example, recently, he's just been killing it, past 4 or 5 starts. Juan Salas, another guy, got a fastball that's got a ton of life. And, the guy that I mentioned, Luis Gastelum, Zach Showalter is a guy that I briefly talked about on the podcast. He is injured right now, but there's just so much talent in terms of pitching at that level. So, yeah, it's an easy choice for me. And with the draft picks coming in there recently, it just, puts the cherry on the top. So that's definitely my favorite level to watch currently.
Getting the reactions from everybody, it seems like that's the popular. Is there an honorable mention? Is there one that might be a close second for anybody?
I think I'm with Kareem that Palm Beach is by far my favorite, but I think in terms of seconds for me, it's probably Springfield. I think Springfield has like a ton of really interesting pitchers as well. But even when you just look at the roster, like they have a lot of really interesting bats, and some of them are like bigger prospects like Jimmy Crooks. But even when you look at guys like Carlos Linares, can't hit worth a lick, at least this year. Great defensive catcher. Absolutely fantastic. You got a guy like Jeremy Rivas, who's been like a really good defensive shortstop, and his bat looks like it's taken a little bit of a step forward this year. Nathan Church, Noah Menlinger, and Chris Rotundo, I think, is the third one. It's a really interesting outfield. Like, I think there's a number of guys there that are at least fun to watch. And if you tune into a Springfield game, like on any given day, they're probably going to have a really good pitching prospect on the mound, which just adds to the experience.
I can definitely get behind a guy named Rotundo. So,
Me too.
Yeah, I think, Shop, you mentioned this earlier when, before everyone else got here. I feel like Palm Beach is kind of the easy answer to give just because A, we have data, we can play with that. And B, it's kind of like the developmental, experimental level where you got a lot of, 3-year college guys who will make their debut there. And, then whatever happens after that. But, I kind of agree with Blake also with Springfield for a slightly different reason where you mentioned, some of the bats there. But I'll say, just by sheer virtue of the team's top 3 or top 4 pitching prospects are there, right? It was whether they're injured or they're actually healthy, where it's Roby, Hens, Matthews, and Jerpy, so that's, by sheer virtue of just having, your 4 like potential rotation caliber arms there, that's something that's interesting to see. It's kind of a treat to see them all at the level. Hopefully they were healthy. It would be like fun to see all of them there at once. One thing I do want to say is that someone needs to get on the idea of having like an NFL Sunday ticket type thing for all the minor league teams where you can have them all on the screen at once and you can watch them. But that'd be pretty cool to see.
Wow, that's just like a day in your life. I think you can make that happen for us.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. I
have a question for the dais.
Okay.
Are all of you in the same house?
I will say the backgrounds were very similar.
I wish we were, but we are not.
I was going to take it personally. I was going to say, if all you guys are there, how come I can't be there? What the heck?
Yeah, putting this much prospect knowledge in one place would be very dangerous. I think that's why they spread them out. Blake has to go all the way to Ohio, and you got to feel sorry for the guy. And I can say that because I'm married an Ohioan. So, all right, guys, appreciate it. Is there anything that you want to plug or talk about the next thing you're writing or anything of that nature? And I'll just leave the floor open. I know Kyle doesn't have anything. He's not doing the squad.
I just want to say I'm surprised that Kyle kept his shirt on the entire show. That's definitely something that was difficult for him to do. I can tell.
Yeah, Kyle tends to step it up when it comes to these kind of things, and I appreciate it. I appreciate that.
I'm trying to be more respectful.
Oh me, I appreciate you all joining me. We'll do it again sometime. I know we've had Blake and Kyle, and I'll get Adam and Kareen on individually, probably during the winter of Alan's discontent when he's no longer dealing with me and dealing with high school baseball players. And we'll talk about it then. But appreciate it, guys, and talk to you later.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, Daniel here. Appreciate you listening to the show, and if you are a regular listener, great to have you. If you're a first timer, hope you come back. We would love it if you would rate and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Either click some stars or give us a write-up. That would be awesome. It helps to get the show spread a little bit farther. And heck, we just like the feedback. I'm going to be honest with you. So if you haven't done that, please do. Give it a shot. You can find us anywhere you find podcasts for the most part. We're also on YouTube. If you're interested in, putting this on in the background, there's no video with it yet. Hopefully never will be. I don't think you want that, but who knows? You can find us, search for Meet Me at Musial, or you can look for Daniel Shoptaw. It's under my personal account. But the shows upload there. So if you want to listen to it there, you can. Contact Alan or Daniel or me. That's me, Daniel. You can contact us at any time at C70 at AMedlock1. You can follow the Twitter account of the Musial at Meet Me at Musial. And thanks for being a listener. Appreciate it. And talk at you later.
0-1 to Poole. In the air, left field, and Pools has given St. Louis the lead. A dramatic, towering 3